this live performance, I suppose. We are fully subscribed, so we actually have people on the waiting list, so we do obviously want to share the thoughts and think with people after. Also want to do at the very front of this conversation a really big thank you to Bosch Alumni Network and its cultural cluster for funding this webinar, and the second one that we're going to have on the 26th of November, at which Tracy Brabin will be joining us as one of our core speakers there. And the cultural cluster for Bosch Alumni Network, we're focusing on broadening discussions around lesser engaged audiences during COVID across Europe. So this really kind of fits in with some of the conversations that they're having. It's a network that's a cooperation between Robert Bosch, Stiftung, I think I said that right, and IAC Berlin, which is a think and do tank for alumni communities around social impact. So thank you very much to Bosch for supporting that. There's also a link if you want to know more about Bosch. Sarah will just pop that link in the chat box now as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nancy Barrett somewhere on my screen and get Nancy to welcome you all from Creative Scene.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. It's absolutely fantastic to see so many people, and being such a big event, we've never done one of these big Zooms before, so we've got over 80 people, and I'm really, really grateful for all of our speakers joining us today and for all of you for coming along. I don't know if, like me, you spend most of your time sat on Zooms these days, and there's been so many really good conversations going on, lots of online seminars and events over the last couple of weeks, so it's a big commitment and really great that you've come to add your voice to this conversation today. Thank you. I'm just going to introduce Anna, who's already spoken. Anna's going to take us through the day, and Sarah, who is our audience development manager and has put together this event for us today and is going to be speaking a little bit later. I think if you know the Creative People and Places programme, we are one of 30 national Creative People and Places, and we are based in the fantastic West Yorkshire towns of Backley and Dewsbury, not very far from Leeds and Huddersfield, but in many ways a million miles apart. The arts infrastructure and the deficit in arts opportunity in our area is huge. That there is no comparison with the level of activity that you get in some of those bigger towns. And so one of our objectives as Creative Scene is to create more opportunities for people locally. And we've been working in that area with all kinds of artists, and mainly the work that we do is outside, on the streets, in community centres. We don't run an arts centre. And as COVID began to hit and lockdown happened, and our area was particularly badly hit and went into lockdown, several different lockdowns much earlier, we began to really ask this question of how in our area, where so much of what we do depends on a really close relationship with people, which is very often built by proximity, building trust through a personal relationship, and where so much we do is dependent on going out, being part of the community. Once we've got locked behind this screen, how can we continue to have a relationship with those audiences and participants that we've built such a strong relationship with over the last 5 or 6 years? We're also very, very much aware, you know, in the first stages of lockdown, a real rush from people to get online for cultural organisations and artists to find a way to communicate with each other, with their audiences and participants. And at the same time, very much aware of the digital deficit in our community, where people do not have access to the hardware or the software or the broadband speed or the time to engage in it. So it was from that context that we started asking, you know, will COVID amplify the arts exclusion that we know is already there? And if so, what can we do about it? How can we really begin to think seriously and intelligently about our response to COVID, and what does it mean about how we deliver over the next few months, which have gone on and on and on. So obviously there's big challenges now to the sector about how we continue to engage, what the rise of digital and online content and delivery means for us. And so it's in that context that we've put this seminar together. We conducted some focus groups to ask people about their digital consumption, and Sarah's going to introduce that later. But really, we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers here. Anna's going to introduce them as we go through, and really looking forward to hearing everybody's voices. I'm going to stop now and hand over to Anna, but before I do that, want to make it very clear, as an action research programme, Creative Scene is here to share what we learn across the sector. We're really pleased to see quite a lot of students from different universities and courses here today. So we are documenting this as well. And we've got the fantastic Matt Warden, who's an artist over there. Good morning, Matt. And he's going to be documenting for us visually. We'll be making that available after this event too, and we hope it will help you continue to have creative discussions. So I'm going to leave it there and pass back to you, Anna, to introduce our speakers.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nancy. That's great. I think Nancy sort of summed up essentially where we're coming from with the conversations here. I think it's been really interesting time, hasn't it, around the whole acceleration with the use of digital in presentation, distribution, participation in cultural content and activities. And as Nancy said, we were having all these conversations around, is the gap widening between engaged and lesser engaged? You know, starting to question, I think, do we need to rethink the model and the way that we segment our audiences and think about our audiences through the lens of digital? And also this shift that we've seen to this kind of hyper-local community that's been generated through the pandemic, and this home-based attendance or creative participation. You know, what we understand as attendance and participation has been changing over the last 6 months. So I suppose we're not coming here today to present a singular answer to all of this. As Nancy said, we're an action research project. So it's really important that, you know, we're just passionate about widening that conversation, hearing different perspectives, and really challenging the question about how we ensure inclusion and accessibility to arts and cultural experiences is not forgotten as we navigate our way through COVID as arts and cultural organisations and professionals. So as Nancy said, we've got, just to kick off, I'll give you a brief summary of how the morning's going to run. We've got 3 wonderful speakers who are going to give you sort of 5 to 10 minute provocation and a bit of their insight to the core central question, is COVID amplifying exclusion in the arts? And I suppose as our speakers, I'll introduce the first one in a minute. As our speakers are chatting, please free to put your questions, thoughts and comments in the chat box. I'm going to do my utmost best to try and capture some of those for the conversation afterwards. Once they've spoken, we'll have a bit of a conversation with them. Then I'll hand over to Sarah, who will share some of our focus group findings. And we're also welcoming the wonderful 6 Million Plus, who are going to talk to you about a project that they ran through COVID. And then we will have an opportunity again to open up for conversations, etc. And some of you have actually sort of submitted questions in advance when you registered. So I'll keep those in mind and try and make sure that we tackle those as well. So without further ado, our first speaker is Anne Torreggiani. She's the founder and chief executive of the Audience Agency, which is the UK national charity for public engagement and participation. She's also co-director of the Centre for Cultural Value at the University of Leeds. She's a specialist in audience strategy and research, looking at trends, patterns of public engagement across arts and heritage, and has got a special interest in the use of data and digital, especially around access and creating access to arts and heritage, increased participation and cultural democracy. So we're not giving your age away here, Anne, but with over 3 decades experience in the cultural sector, she's been really influential. She's spoken on many different stages across the whole gamut of things that impact around audience engagement and audience development. So over to you, Anne, to kick off our morning. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to relieve you of the need to look at my lovely mug for this. Although it's a very short thing, I'm just going to do. I'm going to share screen for a minute, just so to share some facts. with you. Okay, right, so I've got to find it. It's here. Share. Bear with me for 2 seconds. Move that out of the way. Right. Yes, I'm Anne. Anyway, and that was a very long and slightly over the top introduction, not because of you, Anna, just obviously I've got to ask my comms team to write something different. Anyway, thank you. So, set myself up to fail now. Right, anyway, so is COVID amplifying arts exclusion? Here's an interesting question. So, coward's way out. What I'd really like to know is, I'd like to know what you think first. So, I'm going to ask you what you need to do, and I know you're just settling back with your coffee, thinking, right, I'll just drift off now a bit, but I'm going to ask you just to engage with us for a while here. So, would you if you escape, stay in Zoom, but escape from the window so that you can see your browser underneath it, and then what I want you to do is to go to menti.com. Ta-da! And then when you go to menti.com, it's really simple. You'll see there's a little box that says put this number in, and you just need to put in 693392. And you should be able to tell me whether or not you think COVID is amplifying arts exclusion. And I know there are more than 4 of you.
It's creeping up, Anne.
It's creeping up. And I will say, clearly, I'm not going to use this to go, da-da, but you know, I know best. I might do it in a couple of things. That's not quite true. So, excellent. Now I'm going to just say, I know you're just getting into this now, but you've got to go. You've got to be really fast. Anna's going to tell me off, and I'm going to be in really big trouble. So, once you've got the hang of this, we're going to go super speedy, just as a way of crashing through a couple of facts that I think are quite interesting about what's coming out of some of the research and so on. But I'm also really interested to know what you guys think. So this is, I hope this will help our other speakers and help the conversation in general, just to know where we're all coming from. I like that positive thinking in there. I like that. I'll give you another few seconds. If any refusing, if you're not still finding a way to think it's ridiculous, I don't want to join in, I'll accept that. But I think this is good. People, it's ticking across. Excellent. So overwhelming majority there. We're all worried. It's hard not to be, isn't it? Let's face it. Okay, I'm going to just, I think you can we can share these results afterwards, and I will do that. And I think that if you come into this a little bit late, you can go back and do the first questions first. I think I'm right in saying, I can't remember how it works actually. But anyway, so a good sample of you have all suggested, I think that's a decent population, I think, have all suggested that, have given us your views. And I think, you know, obviously most of us are pretty worried about this, but I think I would agree with all of you, because I think the answer, my view is the answer to this question is pretty much yes and no. So let's come on and just have a little bit of thinking, some interesting facts that I think help us to think about this a bit more. Right, okay, so in 1 or 2 words then, this is the most difficult one of all my questions, so don't panic. In 1 or 2 words, what factors do you think might be increasing arts exclusion? Or might be likely to increase arts exclusion? Oh, yeah, interesting. Age. I like that bold person. Confidence, yeah. Yeah. This is interesting because you know how these word clouds work. Clouds work when people start choosing particular things, they come up big. Yeah, yeah. I'm going to go with the idea we've got about 35, 36 of us all kind of engaging here. Okay, so that's really, so there's some really interesting things here coming. Yeah, so we're all pretty worried about the economic impacts of COVID, quite rightly, and I think we can't possibly deny or think that we don't have to deal with that in some of our work and some of the issues around this. Accessibility, lack of digital access, digital exclusion, lack of digital access, those issues digital literacy, they're big, aren't they? They're really coming up as major issues, which I think is really interesting for the conversation. So we've internet poverty. So it looks to me that if you'd added up all of the things we've mentioned, digital as one of the, you know, sort of digital exclusion in some way, that's a pretty major factor in your view there. Interesting, very interesting. Okay, it gets easier now. Ah, that's it. Fear is coming up very, very large there. That's a really interesting one too. This is where it's really frustrating, because now what would be great, of course, is to go and have a coffee in the break and go and find people and say, so why? What's going on there? And this is the disappointing fact. But we will have these conversations again soon. Fantastic. So that's really interesting there. Poverty gap. So poverty, accessibility, digital access coming up as thing. There's some other things around being stuck at home, mental health issues. You know, again, money being very, very, very important in all of your views there. Okay. Okay, I'm going to just very quickly, apologies, this is not a big plug, but I'm just going to say, I'm going to talk really briefly about a couple of facts that I have grabbed out of some of the research that we're in the middle of doing. We're doing shed loads of stuff around the impacts of COVID, of course, as you would expect. And I'm just going to pick out a couple of things that I think are really interesting. If you want to know more about any of them, they're all on our Bounce Forwards COVID Insights hub, and you can go and have a look at all of this. There's loads of reporting. The main things I'm just referring to here are our Culture Through COVID Population Monitor, which is a new, so this is a survey of the population, not of highly engaged audiences that are on the mailing lists of some organisations, and that's why it's kind of really important for this conversation. I've got the very, very first results here. Much more interesting things I'm going to talk about today are coming out, and they'll all be on there. So you know, go and have a good look. And I'm also drawing on our digital audiences survey. Quite a reasonable sample. Lots of organisations are surveying their users of digital content, and that's what I'm drawing on here. But are you ready? I've got another question for you, and it is digital increasing access? So could you please rank these the factors people most value about digital arts programming? So this is actually, I'm taking this from our digital audiences survey, but this is coming out quite clearly in the population monitor, and it's come out in a couple of other surveys as well. So, oh no, sorry, these facts are actually from the population monitor. So we've asked a random sample of people across the country, what is the most important factor? Is it that people can save money on the cost of tickets? They could do things that they would not have been able to visit in person. So that's a question about geography, really. Or the third one, they can watch and participate when they want. So this is not any particular bit of the population, this is just everybody, their overall views on that. Geography, geographic access winning out there, I think, would you know, because you can get to things that you couldn't have done in person. Time going up, money going down at the moment. I'm sorry, I'm slightly overstating place, time, and money, but broadly. I'm watching the count there. Incidentally, these were the top 3 factors why people said that they liked about digital arts programming. And we took a pretty broad view of what we meant by that. Okay, so briefly, any more? 40 if you've put your foot, you've thrown your hat in the ring. Anyone else? No, everyone else is going, don't know. Okay, so the answer to this question from the population survey in the first pass was this, that actually the thing that you've ranked at number 2 there, they can watch or participate when they want. Very noticeably, this factor seems to be wildly more important than anything else. So actually, the next 2 things were actually, they can do things they wouldn't have been able to do in person, also very important, was in number 2. Thank you. That's cheating. But actually, and in fact, the money was lower than those 2. Although I think it's something like 35% of people said that was the most important factor for them. And I think it was something like 25% the physical access, and 23% or something. It was the thing about, you know, saving money on the cost of tickets and other expenses. So quite interesting there. And I think this thing, we probably overlook how and being time squeezed, we often think that time squeezed is something that is to do with, you know, having a very important job and being terribly well off and running around and having a very full social life. But actually, as you know, if you're sort of, this is also a major factor. People are very, very time squeezed, who are also at the other end of the kind of earning ladder, and you know, you're not necessarily cash poor and cash rich and sorry, you're not necessarily cash poor and time rich. In fact, it's often the other way around. So it's an important factor for everybody. And this point about being able to do things that you can fit into the way that you're having to live your life seems to be super important. Okay, moving on. Do you think digital is increasing access for disabled people? Quick one here. Yes, more disabled people are engaged with online than in-person visits. No, it's about the same number engaging online in person. No, fewer people are engaged, fewer disabled people are engaging online or in person, don't know. There's no way I can trace what you say, by the way, so don't panic. You can say anything. It's like... Okay. Keep going. I'm looking for about, yes. So, yes, well done. I think that's correct. In fact, you may have seen this in some of the studies that are coming out, some really good stuff out at the moment, but quite distinctively, we think from triangulating a number of different studies, about twice the number of disabled people are accessing online content than do live organised cultural stuff. So that really good news there, and I think that's telling us that's indicative of something quite important. So moving on, you ready? Next one. What percentage of online audiences and participants have never visited the organisation in person? And when I say the organisation, I mean the organisation who is providing the cultural content. What percentage of that of audiences and participants have never visited the organisation in person? You see, interesting. Yeah, and well done. Yes, I think that's interesting to see that it's quite high. I think, and for some art forms, it's much higher than that, much higher than 38%. But on average, across the board, 38% of people are coming from all over the place. So again, it taps into this point that you know, one of the things that I think we don't necessarily acknowledge is how significant being off the cultural grid is. I think Nancy just referred to that in her introduction. So, you know, one of the biggest barriers, well, we do know that one of the biggest barriers to doing organised, publicly supported, organised cultural stuff, the stuff that we all pay for, one of the things that prevents you from doing it is just being a long way away from where the stuff is. And I think that is particularly going to be acute under the circumstances at the moment, where people are reporting that they want to do, if they're going to go out and do cultural stuff, they want to do it much more close to home than they've ever done before. So people are saying that the distance they're willing to travel to go out and do cultural things is around about 4 kilometres. So I think that is really interesting under the circumstances. So we're seeing that there is definitely this, there is a form of access is being provided by digital, undoubtedly. So what percentage of people think that public cultural events and activities are important for my well-being? I'm nearly there, Anna. If you're looking at your watch, panicking. You don't look too panicked, that's good. So this is an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah. In fact, it is, again, some randomly made up percentages, but the correct one is actually 55%. And I have to say, I was really surprised by that. That's a stonkingly high number of people who said, you know, they thought, and actually a very high number of those say it's very important for my well-being, which I thought was really, really interesting. And we'll come on to why. So for me, for my money, that says that if people are really reporting that at the moment, being involved with doing creative stuff is really important to a sense of well-being, that means that it's very important that we make sure that people actually are able to tap into forms of, you know, provided creativity. So here's one that actually relates very much to lockdown and the overall stress of COVID. So what I'd like to do here is to rank which of these groups have the highest rankings in agreeing with this question. So which group most agrees that I am engaging with arts and culture online to reduce feelings of stress and anxiety. This is very specifically about doing engaging with cultural stuff digitally. And I'm wondering which one of those groups you think is saying it most in order of rank, yeah. Thank you. But there's some bold folk that get in there quick with their, to say it's neat. It's just a sort of a, it's what's our collective feel for these things, I think is what's really interesting here. I'm engaged with arts and the cultural line to reduce feelings of stress and anxiety. Now I have to confess that I've forgotten the exact figures on this, by the way. So you have to go and have a look at it. This is on the, if you look at my colleague Ollie's report on what's coming out in the digital survey, there's a big section on this because we found this very interesting. Okay, so I'll just say that, in fact, the group reporting this the highest of all were those younger audiences under 35. So something like over 60% of them all said that they were doing arts and cultural stuff, and we did use that phrase, arts and culture online. We're doing it, about 60% of them said that they were doing it to reduce feelings of stress and anxiety, which we thought was very, very interesting indeed. Some very significant differences for those younger online engagers about what they want to do. They're definitely much more interested in digital, what we might think of being digital first concept, with a much more immersive, participatory element to it, whereas older audiences, not saying that it was helping them with stress or anxiety, seemed to be, very happy just to do quite passive streaming stuff. But younger audiences definitely looking for something more participatory. But the real shocker for us is that actually the second group, the second most agreeing group, was the one that you've got in 4 there. So less culturally engaged. So that's in those groupings that, where we look at overall engagement with publicly supported culture. And publicly available culture, that the less engaged groups were reporting very high, 49% of less engaged groups in our study, and it's a really good, robust sample, were saying they were engaged with arts and culture online to reduce feelings of stress and anxiety. And of course, that means Netflix, that means looking at all sorts of stuff. But the point is that people are looking for creative stuff to do, that are distractions and helping them to deal with things. So this is kind of, just think about that link with ideas of well-being and how important people think it is. So we're near the end now, you'll be glad to know. Stop panicking, it's fine. Nearly there. So do you think that less engaged people are benefiting from newly available digital content? So this is an opinion one. So last thought, I think less engaged people are doing more online than in person. I think less engaged people did, I think less engaged people did more in person than they are now doing online. I think it's about the same. I hope that question makes sense. I tied myself in knots with that. So less engaged people are benefiting more from newly available digital content. In other words, less engaged people are doing more online than they were doing in person before lockdown, or actually they did more in person than they're now doing online. Okay, and this one I think is the one that worries me most of all, because actually it's the other way around. So this is overall, again, this was looking at digital surveys. So in fact, less engaged groups, it's not a massive difference, it's pretty steady, but actually less engaged people seem to be losing out overall. So this is from the survey of digital audiences. So this is mostly surveying mainstream audiences, audiences for mainstream work and for mainstream organisations, but actually their less engaged audiences are appearing less in that data set than they did for their live work. Does that make sense? So whatever it is those mainstream organisations are doing to engage less engaged audiences, it's not working with what they're doing in sort of digital space, which I think is in itself really interesting, and I think that is it. So thank you very much for playing with that thing. I hope that woke you up. I think you can relax now and listen to some intelligent people saying, some other intelligent people saying things. Fortunately, you've listened to yourselves being intelligent there, which I think is always the best way to go. So I'm just going to end up saying, so I think my answer to that question, you know, about amplification of digital, cultural exclusion, hard to say. I want to turn the question around and say, can digital mitigate arts exclusion? Can digital actually mitigate it? And I think the answer to that is possibly, as we've seen. So despite the extreme economic pressures and a growing poverty gap, I think that you know, there are signs that actually being able to access creative opportunity online could be super, super important for everybody, but it could definitely be important for our less engaged communities, for people who are sort of perhaps at the very sharp end of what's going to happen as a result of COVID. So I think we have to remember that digitised creativity is not for the likes of anyone, and it really matters, as we've seen. Those feelings of well-being, particularly at the moment, it seems to be particularly important. So we have opportunities for new access, we have new needs. So for my money, it's not about if, but how. And I think, as we've seen, mainstream institutions need to be aware of the fact that their digital content is not reaching as far as the other things they were doing. There may be other ways in which we want to work, but I think we also need to recognise that we've had some really, I was amazed listening to a group of creative people and places, artists and practitioners and producers. Some of you are here now, but all talking about the way that the sort of amazing experimentation and pivoting that they've been able to do. And I think, you know, that relates to some work that we've done with creative people and places before lockdown, when we were looking at how CPPs were operating digitally and how they were sort of thinking about that opportunity. And there are some really inspiring stories in there, and I know there've been many more since. So I think, you know, we know that people are responding. And I think one of the things that I found really interesting, I've heard this from lots of people, and I think this comes up later on in some of the things we're going to talk about, is that actually when you're working in that way, we've often thought that cups of tea and sitting in people's living rooms was the way to go about it, but actually digital does create a sort of safe and different space to have different kinds of conversations. So really important concept there. So I think big question, cultural democracy can drive digital democracy, and of course digital democracy is an incredibly important factor in levelling how society works. So I think we may have a particular responsibility there. So I say let's redistribute resources, let's encourage people to experiment, let's get more people doing the stuff that many of you socially engaged artists and socially engaged organisations have been doing, which is, you know, using a human-centred design approach to the way in which we experiment and work closely with our audiences. So let's do it. Anyway, Anna, you'll be glad to know I have now finished in my 10 minutes, but I hope that's
absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, and thank you for a bit of interaction there this morning. So a couple of things that were just coming up in the thread in the chat, really briefly, Anne, just in one sentence, that people were just asking, where is this research and can they see it, access it? Is there a source that you can reference there? I know it's work that you're doing within the audience agent.
It comes from lots of different sources, because there are quite a lot of different reports, but they're fairly easy to navigate your way across. I'm going to put the link in the chat now.
Perfect, that's brilliant. And also thank you to a couple of people. Caroline dropped in a link, another CPP report that was about digital engagement across the Creative People and Places projects, of which there are 31 that are out there at the moment. So there's a few good links in there. I'm not going to go into some of the conversations that have been happening in chat, although they're really interesting, until we come on to the hearing from our other two speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Syima Aslam. And Syma's the founder and director of Bradford Literature Festival, which was established in 2014. It's a 10-day literary cultural celebration welcoming over nearly 70,000 visitors to Bradford annually. And it's got a real reputation for being one of the most socio-economically and ethnically diverse literary festivals in the UK. So it's made a really big and significant impact on the country's literary landscape under the leadership of Syima. So in March 2020, I'm sure Syima's going to tell us a little bit more about this, but literally it normally happens in June, the festival. So obviously lockdown happened, and it was just ready to start promotion for its June programme of over 500 events. So it had to very quickly respond to the COVID pandemic, and ultimately move all of that programming online, or as much as possible that they could. And I think what's really interesting to hear from Syima is that at the heart of the festival and the reputation of the festival is the fact that it takes social inclusion really seriously. As well as extensive free schools programs, it also operates an ethical pricing policy, which offers free or significantly discounted tickets to audiences who may not be able to attend. So really delighted, and I'm going to welcome Syima, and I'll hand over to you now, Syima.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Anne and Nancy, for actually inviting me to speak this morning. And it was that was that was such an amazing presentation. Thank you, Anne. I think we all learnt loads from that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience, or rather the initial mad panic that we had when sort of COVID came along. So as Anna was saying, the festival normally takes place at the end of June, and what that means from the point of view of our timeline is that by the time we hit the end of March, you know, we are, you know, we're in design, we're printing, we're about to get all our promotional stuff out, because normally everything's out at the end of April. So we were, I mean, we were watching and following what was happening in Italy really, really closely, and I think around February time, we started to have quite a few conversations about, you know, what is going to happen here, what might this possibly mean, and even from a point of view of my staff, because we based our offices, not that I have seen them for like, feels like a lifetime now, are actually on the University of Bradford campus, and there was the whole thing of, you know, the movement, the students, and what was this going to mean. So obviously lockdown came along, and I think it's a moment that I will always remember. I remember just actually sitting in my car having a conversation with one of my team members, where it was like, what are we going to do, and what are we going to say, and how do we do this, and how do we move forward? And I think lots of people around the country were having that conversation. So obviously it was quite, for us, it was really, really time sensitive. We had to pivot really quickly. We had to work out what we were going to do, how we were going to do it, what were we going to actually put out there. And as Anna was saying, you know, the thing that's been the driving force for BLF, the thing that's actually been at the heart of setting the festival up, and I suppose the thing that actually really drives me is, I mean, I am a bookworm, and I am a groupie, so I love meeting, you know, all the authors and everything, but the thing that was really important for me was the social side of it. So when I set the festival up, it was because when I was going to other places, I was feeling, you know, at times we can operate a little bit of a bubble, and you know, and sometimes I felt that at literature festivals, maybe that the people who needed to hear some of those conversations were the people who were the least likely to hear it. So for me, that was about who felt that they could actually walk into those spaces, but also I think a big thing is always about money as well. Who's actually got the money and the time? Because it is that thing, actually, you know, if you're working, you know, 2 jobs and you've got 3 kids, you know, you don't necessarily have the time to engage in that kind of way. So all of that was really at the heart of setting the festival up. So when we were having those kind of conversations around, what does this mean? What does this mean for the programme? What do we do? That was really, really at the heart of it. And the thing that we were really worried about was the fact that, you know, we run a really big children's programme, which is, and I always sort of feel it's at the heart of the festival. I mean, about 70% of our programming is actually CVIP. And the children's programme is also meant to be, it's meant to be almost quite incidental, so that the people who walk into it are people who might not normally engage with arts and culture, but the idea is that they sort of fall into the festival and then find a way through. And we talked a lot about our City Park audiences, and for those of you who are not from Bradford, City Park is sort of the urban space park right in the heart of Bradford. So where we ended up was, I mean, from a digital perspective, we hadn't done a lot digitally. We talked about it a lot. I mean, I think really the sort of the last 2 years we've been talking about it, and, you know, what do we do? How do we do it? And there'd been lots of conversations. I think quite a few people had said to me, oh, you know, you should live stream, and I didn't want to do that because I felt that one of the really strong things that the festival does is because of the nature of the programming, and because the programming is so diverse, it brings together groups who wouldn't normally come together. And we have lots of conversations with audiences which are about, you know, the incidental conversations that they had at the festival, the people that they bumped into, the people that they sat next to in an event that they would normally never interact with. And I haven't wanted to lose that, but we've been taking some baby steps. So we had been doing things like, you know, filming a few events, cutting them down a bit, and talking about, you know, we put out, you know, little events like that. So the thing that was really important for us was that we felt there was a big chunk of our audience that was going to be excluded. I mean, I was really interested at the time to see, you know, I felt there was just such an outpouring of culture. Although I think we've all got like a little bit Zoom tired now. Everybody's a bit like on another Zoom. But I think at the start, there was that real spirit of people coming together, and I'm going to do something, and I'm going to do something to help. But I personally did feel at the time that the outpouring we were seeing, it would be seen by the people who were already engaged. It was still talking to people who, you know, who were already sort of hooked into those systems or those organizations, or actually knew about those artists. So like I said, we spent a lot of time thinking about what we do. So in the end, we decided on a really like a capsule program of digital events, a program that was still sort of very BLF in the range of the programs that we did, and in the range of the events and the artists that we had. And a lot of our time and effort went into our programming for children and young people, and so we created schools packs. We did a lot of work around that, and that was actually about trying to see how we could help not just teachers but actually parents. I think the thing that we sort of thought about a lot was, and I felt this because obviously, you know, not obviously, but I have a 17-year-old. She was at home, and she was being taught digitally. But I suppose I sort of looked at her and thought, you have the space, you have the time, you have the support, the resource to actually engage with this as much as you can. Even then you're finding it difficult. And I did think a lot about the families where there wasn't necessarily the space or the technology and what was happening with those children. So we created packs, but they were still digital packs. And this was, you know, something that we, again, thought about a lot, because while we wanted to help, we were still sort of wondering, are we reaching the people who actually need this the most? So one of the things I was asked to talk about today was, you know, how did we approach that digitization? Probably with a bit of panic, in all honesty. It reminded me of running the very first festival that I ran in 2014, which was sort of 2 days, 25 events. And we did loads of planning, and we thought we knew exactly what we were doing. And then we ran the actual festival, and it threw up loads of things that, like, oh, we didn't quite think about this. And the digital festival, actually running digitally for the first time, was a bit like that. There were things that we planned. So, you know, we wanted to make sure that everybody was included. So we'd had all these conversations with this company, which was going to transcribe everything. And, you know, and then what we found when it came to it was that actually the broadband width at their end was such that actually to get a file through would take about 2 days. It was, I mean, like really silly things that it hadn't occurred to us. And I think there were quite a few things like that. You know, we try to think about the fact that people might not be able to log on properly, or they might have issues with the internet. And we had one event where I think we sent about 10 different things trying to actually make this event happen. And in the end, it was like we kind of had to give up because we just couldn't get the connections to work. So, you know, there were unexpected things like that were thrown up. Did it create an opportunity? I mean, I think, you know, I think, and I think this is the thing with some of this conversation that we're having, I don't think that actually the entire picture is clear yet in terms of, you know, digital, how many of our families are affected by digital poverty. I think there's a temptation to assume that, you know, digital poverty sort of maps onto families who are excuse me, the least culturally engaged. I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I think this is something that obviously we've been talking about culture means different things to different people. What people engage with and what they do is different in different cultures as well. And I think because obviously we work in the sector, for us engagement is about who's engaging with us. And obviously there's a far broader picture. I think in running digitally, yes, it created an opportunity for us. You know, so you know, the range of the festival is that we look to be very rooted in our, you know, in our communities and take them on the journey with us. But we want, you know, regional, national, international audiences. And I remember having this like real feeling of like, yes, we've done something, when about 2 years ago we would say we had 1% international audience. I think what we found with with doing things digitally, internationally, it's had a far stronger reach, and this was again quite interesting in terms of how we, you know, as a sector, we measure data as well. So what we could see from YouTube was that actually we had about a 50% international audience, accounting for about 59% of the watch time. But if we looked at our survey data, the audience was 92%, but I think that's about who's, 2% UK, but I think that's actually about who's actually engaging with the surveys. And I think this is some of the stuff actually around digital and digital exclusion as well, is that at the moment, a lot of the work that we've been able to do, even to measure that digital exclusion, is digital, which, you know, then in itself has its own bias. So I think for us, it's been, you know, it's been a really interesting learning experience. I don't think that a lot of the families that we normally get to, you know, those families that we have coming through City Park, the families where we rely on the pester power from schools to drive that engagement through, I don't think a lot of those people engage with our digital offer. I think, you know, some of this will come out a bit more in the wash as we go along, but I think a significant amount of the engagement that we had digitally was actually, it was an older, white, more affluent audience from outside Bradford, which I think from an audience perspective is very different to where BLF is normally. You know, obviously that's an audience that we strive to get, but, you know, over the last 5 years, about 52% of our audience has been diverse, 42% of our artists have been diverse, and that's something we worked really hard on. I mean, the thing that it did do, and I think this is the really great positive thing about digital, is I think people were more experimental. So, you know, people who might not have engaged with, you know, an event on Rumi or the lecture that Tim Winter, Aka Sheikh Abdul Hakim Arad did, or even poetry from somebody like, say, Mahogany Brown. I think they sampled those events in a way that they might not have done at the festival. But I think there's I think while the benefits were there for kind of the more affluent, more engaged communities, I think there's a lot of more work that needs to be done about how sort of digital benefits actually extend through communities. I think for us, you know, in terms of that whole conversation, like I was saying, around sort of, you know, ableism and exclusion, we pivoted so fast that I think some of those things, although we were conscious of them, didn't happen in the way that we thought that they would. And I know we have more work to do on that side. And I don't think that was probably just us. I think that was probably, you know, across the sector. And, you know, I think there was a rush to create a digital offer from all sides. And I think one of the things that probably we need to think about as a sector, we probably need to take a little bit of a step back and say, you know, where is that compulsion coming from? And what needs to be digital and what doesn't, and what are the advantages and disadvantages? Because there are things that we lose as well. Because I think where there is a digital offer, it has to be motivated by the right factors. Like I was saying, you know, we wanted to do digital for a while because certainly with some of our offer, we know that actually it will have a real appeal internationally and nationally as well. But that bit is not about our necessarily about our communities. And when I talk about communities, I'm not talking about diversity, I'm talking about socioeconomic factors, because, you know, I think in terms of affluence, there are a lot of, you know, quite a chunk of our BAME audience will be the affluent audience who is engaging with things that they might not otherwise find in other places. But I'm sorry, and I am going to stop talking in a minute, but I just think in terms of a sector, the thing that we do need to think about is we do need to be really clear-eyed and say, you know, how much of the digital that was done did we do for ourselves? And how much did we do for our audiences? What was actually the driving force? How much of it was actually about making sure that we were relevant in this landscape and we weren't being sort of seen as a kind of, you know, a decadent nice to have, which gets wiped away by economic austerity, you know, when as everything really starts to bite. And I think on that side, you know, funders have mainly been quite generous and understanding. I think the thing that we do need to think about as we move forward is that if we are talking purely about numbers, and that whole sort of, you know, the clicks, digital is far cheaper. It's far easier to talk about reach and really big numbers with digital, but it's not necessarily going to give that true engagement and to create that sort of change that you can make in physical spaces. So yeah, I mean, I should probably shut up now, but I think these are the, you know, these are the things that we need to think about. You know, we spend a lot of time at BLF talking about that we work. Work is, you know, we work with communities and for communities, and you know, the work that we do on that side is driven very much from an inside point of view. And I think we you know, as a sector, we need to be thinking about digitally from that point of view as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Syima. Some really interesting points there. Again, I'm going to hold on to those until we've heard from Aidan as well. So thank you very much for that contribution and being so honest and transparent about the panic and the challenges, which I'm sure many arts cultural organisations went through. So without further ado, moving on to Aidan. Aidan Moesby is a disabled curator and artist who explores civic and personal well-being through a body of work, which is rooted in research, response and conversation, and he explores a variety of different things around climate change and mental health. He works within a variety of various contexts, within the galleries, beyond galleries, and his practice includes disability arts and mainstream representation as a visual arts and curator. So he's worked and exhibited and curated nationally and internationally, and worked with partners such as Dundee Contemporary Arts, the Tetley, Watershed, etc. So without further ado, over to you. And we are getting a little bit tight on time, Aidan, not to focus the mind, but yes, if you could share with us your thoughts now on that question. Thank you. Oh, you're on mute, Aidan. Sorry, mate. Oh, there we are. Perfect.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Anna. I'll keep it succinct. So we know that external stresses disproportionately impact on the most marginalised and vulnerable groups, be it climate change or COVID, the poor, the sick, the disabled, refugees, asylum seekers, all disproportionately impacted. With the closure of cultural buildings, there's been a rush to fill the digital space, a new rush, a new digital Klondike. But this rush for digital, so potent and full of potential, risks being as ableist and exclusionary as the analogue. Not everything translates to the digital. Not everything is digitally relevant. And who is giving thought to the audience? How much of the work is truly accessible? Not just audio described, captioned, signed, alt-texted. I've just done an exhibition in Mima and produced 3 different versions of every single moving image. So if the will's there, it's easy to do. But what if you don't have access to the required digital platforms? You live in digital poverty, the libraries are shut. Where or how do you access the relevant equipment? What if you can't get out or you're shielding? What's happening to all those digital resources sat in all the empty arts buildings right now? Now, when it's expedient to have online meetings because it suits the normative privilege of organisations, we can have them. I no longer need to travel to London for a 30-minute face-to-face. If you can or do have digital access, it often comes at a cost. Something is now happening in my house, in my private spaces. Meetings, webinars, events have a digital emotional cost. The codification is different and I may not understand. I need to work harder emotionally to be present. I may have to mask more or not be able to mask at all. How do I stay digitally safe? This all has a cost. Extra labour impacts on the accessibility or the inaccessibility of the digital world. It just pushes the problem around. It's just a different set of circumstances, locations, but the same issues. COVID disproportionately impacts on the poorest, marginalised sector of community. You cannot ignore privilege, and with this comes agency. Who owns the digital space or mediates it? Who decides who has access to it? Whose terms are we meeting on? That is generally the white, privileged, middle-class, normative people who run organisations and hold the space. And there's a difference between people accessing digital content and that content being accessible. So yes, COVID is amplifying digital exclusion, but it's amplifying the exclusion which already exists. There we go. Short and succinct.
Sorry, I was having a conversation to myself there about how brilliant it was. I realised I was on mute. Thank you, Aidan. That was absolutely brilliant. And I think, you know, really brought up a number of different issues there. There is some fantastic comments going on in the chat box, so I'm trying to manage it all. But I think what I'll do now is I'll just sort of open up, maybe if I can sort of share some of my own reflections on listening, and then if there is anything, I'll try and keep an eye on the chat box if there's anything that anyone specifically wants me to ask. I think if I go backwards, just picking up on some of your points, Aidan, around agency and who holds and mediates that digital space. I think you've lended us a number of key questions there to think about. I think it's been fantastic hearing from Syima about how an arts and cultural organisation clearly have lots of questions when they're trying to think about how might we engage with our audiences, new and existing, in this kind of digital world. But actually some of the points that you make, I think, push the questions that arts and cultural organisations need to be reflecting on. How do they mediate that space? I also really thought it was fascinating around the fact that pushing the problem around and almost like the invasion of personal and private space that comes with being part of this kind of digital presentation and engagement in relation to that. Syima, there was some lovely comments there. Tracy Braben was saying what a wonderful job you did from the digital perspective in getting excellent events online and sold out, and actually, you know, perceiving that they were diverse audiences as well. There was also some interesting stuff and agreement. Kate Strodrick was highlighting that maybe in this kind of rush to digital, that a positive to bring out of it is actually that people are more willing to try something if they can escape without being seen, which I think links with your point around being a bit more experimental on that as well. And I think what came out really strongly, particularly from what you were saying, Syima, is that actually the entire picture is not clear yet. And like we said, we're not coming here with the answers. I just think it's about raising some of these questions and thinking about the research possibly being skewed, as you Anne and Syima has mentioned, you know, that actually these are people who are already digitally engaged. So it's almost like, how do we still continue to enable and give access via digital, but retain something of the personal relationship, I think, in some of the projects that we need to deliver. Even if we can't do them so close physically, how might we begin to connect so that COVID doesn't just widen that gap, as I said at the beginning, between the engaged and the lesser engaged, but we start to think differently about that. And I think some of the findings that Anne was sharing with us with regards to actually the lesser engaged being more engaged to some extents and purposes on trying new things or finding new ways to engage online that actually would help with their mental health and well-being was really positive as well. I mean, if I sort of open it up just to Syima, Aidan and Anne, is there anything that each of you said listening to the other conversations that you feel resonated or you'd like to stay a little bit more on? Syima, what was there anything from Aidan or Anne's conversations that you that jumped out for you?
Yeah, I was actually really, I was really interested in the, well, I was actually really interested in the poll that you're doing and the responses that were coming through that little interactive bit. I thought that was really interesting in terms of the responses that were coming back. And I'm definitely really interested in reading actually the work that you've been doing around the digital exclusion and just, you know, what people are saying. And because I think, you know, part of the thing with COVID has been, I mean, certainly for us, there was such our timelines were so tight, and actually that whole thing of, so we were looking around at the time to see, okay, you know, how are other people pivoting, what are they doing? But I think there's also that thing of, you know, what can you then do as an arts organization? Because I think at a certain level, then you start moving into sort of like the realm of, you know, broadcast, and you can't really, you know, the budgets that we have, can't really compete with Netflix, or even, you know, say the National Theatre. And I think there was a real thing around, I think that there was a disparity in terms of what smaller organisations could do with the budgets that they had, and what the really big organisations with the big teams and the archive and the resources could do. And I found that really, really interesting to see. And like I said, we've sort of spent quite a lot of time now actually, you know, unpicking what we did and kind of, you know, what could have been done better and what's everybody else doing and how do we move forward. And I think it's also interesting because we're doing it in the light of the whole thing of, you know, where are we actually going to end up from a COVID perspective. So I'm like looking at the 2021 festival at the moment and trying to think about actually at the point that it falls at the end of June next year, what is the world going to be looking like? What's consumer confidence going to be like? What should we be doing? Sorry, I'm getting slightly off on tangent, but I'd be really interested actually to sort of get Aidan's and Anne's views on those, and from everybody in the audience as well.
I mean, there's some interesting comments coming up here as well. Jonathan Hepworth just said that the technology is alluring. This can distract from deep design in a surface rush to exploit the affordances of new technology, which he's quoting from a report there. But I think that there is this kind of which comes back to your point, Anne, around human-centered design, and how do we need to rethink the way, the how arts may, you know, engage with our audiences moving forward. And was there any further thoughts from what Aidan said?
Yeah, what I was just going to say, and I think I spoke plenty in the first place, or allowed us to do that. But I think, you know, I mean, obviously, what Aidan said is, you know, absolutely undeniable. You know, the danger of people who are excluded from all sorts of, you know, parts of life at the moment is going to just, you know, it's just going to be massively exacerbated. So we know that that's the backdrop. I suppose what I was saying was, without wanting to sound too Pollyanna, was that actually, if we just treat digital like a way of broadcasting or narrowcasting the things that we already do, and that is what lots of mainstream organisations are going to do, and that actually works for lots of people. You know, they want to be able to see, they don't usually have access to their national theatre, and there's an argument that says that everybody should, you know, and we have a job in making sure people feel that they can own and have those things on an equal footing. So I think there's definitely something in that direction. But I think there is also a real need for people to find and to be encouraged and connected with other people that want to do creative things. And I think there is also a place for us to do much more interesting things in the digital space. And I do mean that very broadly, including mobile and so on. And I think I was really loving that quote actually from that Jonathan had put in, because I think that is spot on. Sorry, I won't talk anymore.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And just to pick up on a point Claire Black's made from Joe Cox Foundation, which I think also links with some of the things you said, Aidan, around how do you find those people who don't have devices? And does everyone who is digitally excluded want to be included online? So there's a much broader conversation, I think, to be had in relation to the way that we move forward in developing and presenting our cultural content as well. Aidan, was there anything else? So, yes.
Yeah, I think like there's a big, you know, it's great that stuff is going on digital and online or wherever, however you access it. But there's so much stuff out there that just, it's put out, it's not increasing accessibility. It might be increasing provision, but it's not increasing accessibility. How much stuff is, you know, signed or, you know, audio described or captioned, or, you know, and made accessible truly. And also I fear that, you know, whilst it's expedient now because we're in a COVID time and we can't meet in rooms, it's like, oh, you know, everything's digital, and let's talk about accessibility and inclusion. You know, as soon as lockdown finishes, and we're in a post-COVID, it's going to go back to buildings, it's going to go back to the kind of inaccessibility, ableist, normative, privileged kind of situation that we have. People, you know, we've had the creative case for how long? And what has actually changed? And also it's like, if we're talking about access, then organizations who produce the content have to be relevant and represent the people who they are trying to access. When the Arts Council put out the report in February about the diversity of staff, you know, the number of you know, minorities in the broadest sense, be that to do with race or color or sex or identity, gender, stuff like that, it's still white privilege generally. It's still, you know, I'm not represented particularly on stage. It's like, you know, people still can't have disabled actors, or it's very rare to have disabled actors playing disabled characters if there's any written, you know, things like that. It's like, it's just, there's so much lip service. Creative case already exists, DDA already exists, and actually, you know, we're still living in a world where we have to struggle to you know, to be included, and we're becoming more and more polarized. You're either with us or against us. There's very little kind of, you know, nuanced conversation going on in the middle. And, you know, it's just, yeah, for me, it's just pushing the problem around. And it's about time that we start to make real difference to access and really include thoughtfully, compassionately, the people who, you know, not just dropping in and doing some work and then parachuting out again, but something that has legacy, meaning, authenticity, and you know, just like long-lived inclusion in a real sense, not just for a tick box, not just for a season, not just for a festival, but forever.
I think that's a really valid point, Aidan. I think this kind of, you know, it feels like in many ways, the way that arts and culture has responded is that they've accelerated in trying to be accessible via digital, but it's not necessarily embedded within and ingrained within the way that we work in a normal, you know, situation. That it means that it doesn't matter whether COVID's happening or not, it should be part and parcel of the way that we do things. So I think that's a really, really important point. There's so much to talk about, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, obviously we've got all the stuff going on in the chat, which is fantastic, and thank you for everyone that's popping in. Caroline was mentioning the next Creative People and Places Network case studies on the theme of touch and connection, and then there's been some wonderful conversations there about how can we, you know, the impact of actually not having that live physical performance, which we haven't even got into today. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's our Communications and Marketing Manager. And in this next section, as we move towards the end of the seminar, Sarah's going to share with you some of our research that we did with some of our audiences. And then I'm going to bring in 6 Million Plus to tell you a little bit about their project. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Anna. I'm just going to share my screen with everybody so you can see the presentation. So just thank you to all our speakers. Everything's been so interesting and given us loads of food for thought, and actually a bit of it also feeds into what I'm going to talk about now. So just a reminder about who we are. We're one of the Arts Council's Creative People and Places initiative. This programme has seen significant investment into key areas of England where the arts is significantly below the national average. So in our area of West Yorkshire, which is Dewsbury and Batley, which is in between Leeds and Wakefield and Bradford, the area doesn't really have a traditional arts venue. It's a non-metropolitan suburb area. There are no theatre venues, very limited arts galleries, and we've had a lot of funding cuts, which means people in our area have limited access to museums or to libraries. Despite this, we've welcomed over 130,000 people to our event since 2014, which is a huge achievement, as I said, where there's no real traditional arts ecology. There are a variety of reasons for our success, but one core contributing factor has been our curiosity to understand the people and the places in the small towns that make up our patch. We believe as well that when you hand the reins back to people, they make brilliant cultural things happen. So we work with volunteer-led festivals to increase their capacity and help them develop. We work with local artists to test new work. And we make sure that people in our area can access high quality, affordable culture right on their doorstep.
We don't run a venue or a gallery, but instead you'll find us exploring new ways of presenting the arts in places where people live, work and play. So for example, we've screened short films in an abandoned mill, we've got a chef from a local restaurant to be part of a play in a curry house, and we use community centres and rugby clubs for venues for our shows. So, in May 2020, we spoke to people from our key audience groups to help us understand about how they were keeping entertained during lockdown. And these were people that had been on a journey with us as an organisation. They're audience members and participants who we've nurtured through providing high quality, affordable cultural events right on their doorstep, like I said. So we knew at the beginning of lockdown that this audience was ready to receive cultural content, but we didn't know to the extent to which they were seeking it out, or to the extent that the role of culture actually did play in their lives when we went into lockdown. So our 4 key audience groups that we spoke to, we lightly categorise them as this, is the local. The local is our series of political urgent work that we put, so it's touring theatre, it's local comedians putting things on, and we tour them around pubs, clubs and community centres in our area. This audience tends to be young professionals who are looking for something to do in the evening, or empty nesters, and they're a little bit more culturally engaged than our average audience. We also spoke to artists working in the community. These are our audience and participants who are emerging or established socially engaged artists. We also spoke to our family audience. The On Tour Families is our series of really affordable work for families that goes into community centres during the half term. These are very busy audience members, but they tend to be families, caregivers and play workers who are really, really loyal to that half term programming. And we also spoke to our young people, so audience and participants who are under 25. And here's the range of people that we spoke to. I must say, this isn't representative data at all. It's much more just us speaking to our audiences, trying to really understand where their heads were at during lockdown. But we really wanted it to be representative of our area. North Kirklees is a very diverse area, and it's also quite a young area. I think about 22% of the people who live here are under 25. So we really wanted to be young people's views to be represented in what we were saying as well. And as you can see, many of our people in our community come from a South Asian background, so we really wanted to make sure they were represented as well. So how did our audience keep entertained in lockdown? Zoom was mentioned in nearly every conversation that we had with people, whether this was keeping in touch with family and friends or setting up their own pub quizzes to do on a Saturday night. It was really, really a paramount of importance that they could access Zoom. But it was also lovely to see that our audience was streaming theatre as well as streaming Netflix and Amazon Prime. And many of the people that we spoke to were keeping themselves entertained by reviving or picking up a new hobby. Again, lovely to see that people were being creative in their own homes. And so the things, and as you can see from there, about 77% of our audience were being creative during lockdown. They were writing, they were cooking, they were filmmaking, really without little intervention from arts organisations, they were getting really creative in their homes. A caveat here, we did reach out to people via online channels. So we didn't really expect many of the people that we spoke to have many overwhelming issues about how they accessed entertainment online. But the people that we did speak to did mention family members or friends that they knew were really struggling with internet access, and they picked up that as a problem in their own lives. So either they were helping family members to access FaceTime so they could play cards with each other, or they were noticing it in the sense of they knew that their family members couldn't socialise with them over Zoom, like I said, that many people were doing. However, something that did come up a lot was that a lot of people in our area were reporting a slow internet connection, which was kind of holding them back from accessing cultural content or entertainment online. So as on the previous slide, you saw that about 82% were using streaming services and 62% of that were film, box sets and music, so the most popular one. And while the majority of people that we spoke to were streaming entertainment, 56% weren't participating in any kind of cultural activities. So they weren't getting involved in like a craft workshop or a printing workshop or a kind of drama class or anything like that. Only 3 people that we spoke to, that's that 7.7 figure, weren't accessing entertainment online at all, choosing instead to watch DVD box sets or do things around the house or get out into the garden. It's quite a low figure, but it was interesting nonetheless. And National Theatre at Home was quite a popular choice among our audience members as well. And this is interestingly contrasted with the only 3 local organisations local to us were mentioned in our conversations with our audience, which were the Lawrence Batley Theatre, Opera North and the West Yorkshire Print Workshop. Those were all very local to us. And our participants really did miss the live experience. So when we were talking to them, things that they would kind of naturally came up in the conversation, they were really missing attending the theatre, really missing going to galleries, attending gigs. Going to choir as well was a really big one that kept coming up. Choir, for some of our participants that we spoke to, choir formed quite a big kind of social kind of anchor in their lives, as well as being something creative that they did in a group. And choir, they found, just couldn't be replicated online. That was something they were really missing. So what did we find out about our individual audiences? The local, as I mentioned earlier, are kind of empty nesters or young professionals who really enjoy our series of politically relevant and urgent theatre. Ironically, for the local, 2 participants in this group commented how lockdown had really emphasised that lack of local connection to the area. One person really said that she'd lived in the area for 4 years, and this was the first, and although it was also the first time that she'd really interacted with her neighbours, so the next door, she also really had no awareness of what was going on in the local area. Another participant that we spoke to ran a ukulele group, and she normally got people from the local area to kind of come to that and participate. And what she was finding was that the local people that normally came and participated dropped off, but she was able to extend her reach internationally. So she had people joining from New Zealand. And these people were kind of accessing things like podcasts, streaming theatre, watching music gigs via Facebook Live and participating in music groups. And what did we find out about our artists working in the local community? More than any other group, we found that this group really had a desire to bring people together through creativity. Many of them were doing work anyway to support the effort against COVID-19, if that was kind of working with friends or working in the local community. And more than any other audience group, our artists working in the community had been engaging in workshops online and using this time to diversify their practice or learn new skills. So, for example, some audience members, some artists that we spoke to were doing training in video editing or website editing. And this group, more than any other, again, really emphasised that desire to experience art as a collective. One person in particular said that they kind of looked around the galleries virtually and it left them cold. It was something they really wanted to do physically in the here and now. Our families were the busiest audience that we spoke to, obviously doing homeschooling, as well as some of them were still working from home, so really trying to juggle everything. But they were using that time and really valuing it with their family, with being together in the house and valuing time with their families. They also were finding, more than other groups, ways to be creative together without very little intervention from arts organisations or online sources. So in addition to schoolwork, people kind of talked about how they were getting out in the garden and making dens and camping, writing poems, watching films, baking. And when asked about engaging with or participating in arts events online, these participants weren't really that enthusiastic about it. One person really brought up it was the atmosphere that they really liked, like going to one of our local festivals and soaking up the atmosphere, meeting people. A lot of what Syima was saying about that incidental meeting of people, that was something they really missed, that they felt couldn't be replicated online. And our young people, interestingly, many of our young people found themselves taking the opportunity to step back from the digital sphere and their phones. One participant commented that pre-COVID she'd been trying to turn her phone off before she went to sleep, but now this was the actual time she was doing it. And participants in this age group talked about focusing on their career development during this time as well. Many of them had been furloughed or had lost their jobs during this time, or were working in the local community. So they were applying for jobs, learning different skills, making films, or doing university work. A thread we didn't really pull on in this group, but it was something that did come up, was one person commented as the focus group was ending that it was the first time that she'd spoken to anybody outside her family since lockdown began. As I said at the beginning, these focus groups done right at the beginning of lockdown, and it wasn't really something we asked anybody else, but it was something interesting that came up. And what else did we find out? We spoke to 2 people who had participated in a mental health support group, which is a creative group that meets in a safe space every week and does drama activities. So we spoke to them, just inquiring how that was being replicated online, and it had moved online. It had taken a very different form. It couldn't really be the same kind of participation. I think they were reading plays instead of acting out plays. But these participants found that accessing the entertainment they were accessing online, they were doing it for the benefit of their mental health, and especially these groups that had moved online, they were accessing them for their mental health, and it was providing a real anchor to their lives during lockdown. However, these participants were also very wary around using social media, citing the detrimental effect on their mental health for the reasons not using them. So what did we learn? While our audience were accessing entertainment online, far fewer were participating in cultural activity online. And we're going to hear from Kim Strickson from 6 Million Plus in a moment, who'll pick that up as well. Human connection was a premium. Audiences valued accessing entertainment with others, so their families. One person in particular said that they'd made a kind of appointment to view in their diary to view National Theatre at home every week with her family. Another person had kind of marked out time in their diary to play cards via FaceTime with their elderly father that they taught to use FaceTime, or entertainment which really responded to the moment. One participant, again, we spoke to, said that the reason she started listening to many more podcasts was because podcasts could be turned around very quickly and they seemed to talk very directly to the moment that we were living in. And what kind of digital divide are we really talking about? As I said, this is a very self-selecting group. We went out online, we contacted people online, so we know that these people kind of had access and were confident in using Zoom or confident in talking to us digitally. But there did emerge a divide between the younger people who were saying, no, actually, I'm using this time to step away from the online sphere and my phone, to the older people that we spoke to who were much beginning to upskill themselves in becoming much more better at using Zoom or much more confident in using online technology. That's it. Thank you.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that. I think there's some, what we were trying to provide there, I think, is this kind of hyper-local, what was our experience? Really briefly, Sarah, could you just tell us the numbers involved in that research? Someone was asking what were the statistics based on?
Yes, we spoke to 17 people via online focus groups, so via Zoom, and 22 people then responded to the survey, so 39 people together. A very, I must emphasize, very small selection. It is, we know it's not representative entirely of the population of North Kirklees. There were much more informal conversations with our audience members, with our loyal audience members, to really get a sense of where their heads were at during lockdown.
And I think there's some interesting stuff emerging. There's much bigger questions coming out of this morning, I think, around whose culture are we talking about and what denotes culture. You spoke a lot there, Sarah, about in Netflix and TV and entertainment, etc. And someone earlier, it might have been Kate, had mentioned about the role of TV as entertainment and what that took on during lockdown particularly as well. Trafford Parsons has made a good point. Again, it feels like it's a whole nother webinar conversation, but with regards to the quality, you know, we're not really discussing the quality of art on offer at the moment. So I think, you know, that is another thing to think about. What is the quality and how do we retain quality when we, you know, when we are looking at different platforms for presentation, whether that continues to be outdoor arts or digitally as well. So I'm conscious of time, and we've still got a really wonderful kind of contribution from Kim and Jasmina. So I'm going to hand over straight to you, Kim. And so Kim will introduce 6 Million Plus. We'll have a brief chat with Jasmina, and then we'll, towards the end of the session, wrap up with a really short excerpt from the wonderful project that they did. So over to you, Kim.
Thank you, Anna. First of all, can I just say I apologise for being behind these. This is me. I have a really nasty eye infection at the moment, so I'm going dark. So I wasn't hiding, believe me. Yeah, 6 Million Plus. I'm the coordinator for 6 Million Plus Charitable Trust. We do a lot of work encouraging refugees and local people across Kirklees to work together to share life experiences, stories, and interpret aspects of those stories for a wider audience. And we usually do this by bringing people together in a neutral and a creative space, which, as we all know, has been pretty impossible for most of this year. So in the summer, together with Creative Scene, we worked on a project called Small Contentments. And that was initially planned as a series of workshops for people to attend in an actual space. So first of all, just picture Rahat Lokum, or as it's known in the UK, Turkish delight. It's enjoyed with coffee in Bosnia, and we took that image of the cube of sweetness to remember the boys and men who died as a result of an act of genocide in Srebrenica in Bosnia in 1995. So that was the theme. 25 households across Kirklees made a green, pink or yellow cube using whatever materials they had at home or in the garden to remember the sweetness of lives so ruthlessly ended 25 years ago, and also acknowledge the feelings of isolation from people they loved themselves during lockdown. It sounds pretty serious, and it was, but the project was a joyful, lively, warm process of individuals and families connecting with one another during lockdown. A lot of people knew each other and had worked with us before, so there was that element of trust from the start. Others were new to the group, were brought in by friends or acquaintances of the existing participants, or in some cases, the artists involved. And the group was made up of local individuals, artists, students, asylum seekers, refugees, aged 6 to 96. We started, really importantly, by visiting everyone in their gardens or in parks, which we were still allowed to do back in May, taking them a small bag of Bosnian coffee and some Rahat Lokum. And we provided a few materials if people needed them to get them going with their cubes. But that was it. The photographs we took of people in their gardens immediately kick-started conversations about plants and gardening on the very lively WhatsApp group that we set up for the project. And we used WhatsApp because Zoom, things like Zoom, were not easy for a lot of the asylum seekers, refugees. People found the language very difficult. With WhatsApp, it could be slower and they could translate things and come back to us. So I think that's really important to point out. Yasmina, who's here with us today, created a short video about how to make good Bosnian coffee, and everyone tried it, including participants from Burundi, Syria, Kurdistan, Sudan, and China. Gardening and cookery tips were shared, and even remedies for sleeplessness. It seems that many of us, unsurprisingly, were and still are having trouble sleeping. The ultimate aim was to create a film of remembrance for the 25th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide. But it was also about celebrating the precious people in our own lives we couldn't see or visit. And it obviously made people feel better to tell one another about the sweetness of people they missed and to feel part of a family of almost 70 people. I must admit, we were astounded at the level of engagement. We've never had such a large group of participants working together at one time. For me, personally, the plan to get people to make cubes at a distance and keep in touch with everyone via WhatsApp was a poor alternative to meeting together in a workshop space and making something together and creating the atmosphere that we knew and loved from previous projects. But I was amazed at how creative people were in their own homes, and delighted that they involved other members of their families in that process. And one of the best things was being party to the conversations and revelations on the WhatsApp group, often shared in the early hours. Would that kind of honesty, intimacy, and philosophical exchange have happened in a workshop situation? Would people have listened to one another so attentively and responded with such interest, empathy, and generosity? So in beginning to address this question, for us, with participants who we already knew and trusted us, running an arts and community project, for the most part online during lockdown, actually enhanced and developed not just access, but that feeling of individual creativity and also sharing. Not that it was without its issues regarding language barriers, intermittent access to digital devices for some people, and most of whom were the asylum seekers and refugees, constantly supporting the process of making the cubes at a distance, and the hours it took to manage sensitively the 24 hours a day WhatsApp activity. However, we had an existing group of participants who were desperate to do something positive, and they in turn invited others to join that group. Would it have worked so well if we'd approached people cold, marketing it online? I don't know. And without that first face-to-face encounter in the garden, and the group are still asking, when will it be possible to have a get-together for a big party and give one another a hug? So that's it from me about small contentments. We've got Yasmina here, who actually was a participant in our project, and she is also a trustee of 6 Million Plus Charitable Trust. We just wanted to ask her how and why she got involved in it in the first place. Yasmina.
Hi, I'm Yasmina, and I am from Bosnia. I am now with 6 Million Plus about 7 to 8 years. So every year we are doing Holocaust Memorial Day, and as well now we are doing every year commemoration of genocide in Srebrenica. As we know, this year commemoration in Srebrenica was 25 years of commemoration, so we wanted to do something, but as everybody know, this coronavirus happened, so we've been stopped to do anything. Then Kim came to idea to over WhatsApp to get group together, and in this group was over 80 participants from over 15 countries, and through small contentment I've been connected to everybody on different level because we didn't been together, but still I feel so connected to everyone 24 hours a day. As Kim said, if this been on Zoom or anything else other than WhatsApp, I don't think that we will be connected as we did because we have to have in mind lots of people are refugees here. They don't speak English on first place, so they needed time to translate what everybody else are talking about. As well, they need to feel that connection because they don't have even families. As myself, I got families over 8 countries. So for this year is very, very difficult for myself because I didn't see anybody of my family and I'm here alone in England. But when we meet together through WhatsApp, I feel like I got small family which I can trust and I can talk about. It is difficult this year for everyone, and we have to get in mind people who are going through wartime. For me, especially, I felt this is second war for me because we got these hours when we can't go to town, when we need to stay at home, and as well, not just in my here in England, but in other countries like in Bosnia, they got curfew hour, so people feel like they are like in wartime. So it helped us so much for a few months to come together, to talk to the people, to speak about our feelings, what we felt through the war. And it was, you know, just telling the stories, healing for ourselves. Now I think talking about what's happened through this time for COVID-19, it will be healing time for everyone, especially when we are talking like this on the internet. So I think it will help to everyone as well, as much as we are not so distancing each other, because my daughter, she's working through this COVID-19, she's working all the time. as dental nurse. My son is working at the university in Huddersfield. He is at home but working from the home. My son was, he's 14 years old. So he's in school. At that moment, he was learning from home, but now he is in school. And myself, I was connected through the internet with all these people. So we are coming as a family from more different places to come together, and I think it will help. It works to everyone.
Thank you, Yasmina. And I think we should just say that the WhatsApp group has continued. So it still exists and people still having the conversations, and we're getting ready to do another project.
Yeah, I'm glad. I can't wait to start another, because we have to think about mentally how people are affected from the COVID-19. Lots of people who are coming from the war zones, they already got lots of stress and everything. But now it's winter time, and as we know, on this time of the year, with weather, we stay at home. It will be so good to connect even through this internet with the people.
Brilliant. So, yeah, no, thank you, Jasmina. That's really, really valuable to have your contribution and your insights to the impact that that project had. And thank you, Kim, for sharing how it worked and the way that you managed to deliver that in lockdown. And I think, as you sort of said, you thought it might be a poor alternative, but you can hear from the way that Jasmina talks about it that actually the impact that it had in bringing people together at that particular time, it always gives me goosebumps. Without further ado, I'm going to get Sarah to just share 2 minutes of the video, and then I'm going to hand over to Nancy to do a bit of a wrap up. But this video is very moving. It's a 15-minute video. We're just going to give you a snapshot.
اسمه عمر، هو مو متجوز ونحن ما شفناه من زمان يعني من وقت طويل كثير من زمان.
Ispod svake rane taj tamni sloj, reče ljubav sada nema više ničega osim ovog trenutka.
He was born in the same year as my sister, and it pains me knowing that this man was robbed of the opportunity to make something of his life.
The world broke you with darkness, but you leave this world a rainbow. The world left you in that space, but you are in our dreams. Your heart stopped in that moment.
Thank you, Sarah. So sorry to cut that off, as it is such a beautiful piece. I think it goes to prove that actually for people who may be perceived as lesser engaged in arts and culture, actually, there are ways that we can still engage and support communities as well. So I'm going to hand over to Nancy just to do a final few words. I appreciate we've gone over slightly, but I think the discussions were so rich that I didn't want to kind of cut them off, I suppose. The chat will try and get some of the conversations and the resources out of that and share with everyone. This is recorded so people can share it post-event as well. But I really just want to thank all of the speakers for contributing today, and I'll hand back to Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody. It's no easy task to try and wrap that up, because I mean that was just such a rich conversation, and I suppose it shows me how much more conversation there is to have, really, about how we respond to COVID and how we build back better. But also, I guess it just really reinforces for me, I think, the important work that Creative People and Places does, and other projects like ours. We're not by any means the only one. And particularly hearing Kim there, just the importance of human connection, whether that human connection is through a digital means, and quite a simple digital means like the WhatsApp group, nice, easy to use, but the human connection that is behind it, which comes from Kim, 6 million plus the artists and the people participating in that, is the most important thing, I think, for me, that we need to keep in mind as we go forward. I was really interested in Syima's talking about how she'd developed a bigger audience online, and I think that's something that we've all experienced, and we've also widened our audience for things nationally and internationally. I think Syima also reflected back there the need to kind of keep bringing that back to the local community. What does it mean to the people that we are doing our festival with and for in Bradford, in the city park? And somebody else also talked, maybe in the chat, about that urge and that real need for people to come out after lockdown. That, you know, there is a digital space. There's fantastic stuff going on. But I definitely feel that personally, and I know when I'm out and about in the limited way that I'm able to be in Batley and Dewsbury at the moment, there is a real strong sense that people actually are really getting ready to come out. And that's a really interesting question for me, because as I said, most of our work has been about that direct interaction, and so beginning to think about how can we take the lessons from digital, some of those real connections and widening out of group activity, as we also go and meet people in the place again. Aidan has some fantastic points, and yeah, you know, absolutely right. I think there's something very similar around digital barriers and physical access barriers, which just kind of exists there across the arts, across different cultural activities, and urgently needs addressing. And I think what it was bringing to my mind was that how do we collaborate with the programs that are there to bring additional digital resources into our communities? Because, you know, at the basic level, if people don't have a machine and an internet connection and super fast broadband, then what you're going to be able to do is really limited. And I don't think there isn't much conversation going on between the arts and creative sector and funding initiatives, policy initiatives that might be trying to resolve some of those barriers, and there's the skills around it as well as the actual physical resource barriers. I've just got sheets and sheets of notes here. I was trying to kind of grab all the conversation. And we'll do some reflection and do a bit more case study around this, and really want people to engage further. I think the conversation around quality is also really important, and how far does digital arts and digital content stray into becoming broadcasting? Again, we know that people's visual literacy in this day and age is very, very high. I think it's no accident that people like National Theatre can do very, very high quality broadcasts. It gets out there. They have a marketing budget. I saw that on YouTube. So I think they were advertising on YouTube. So that might have been a big factor in some of our more local audiences getting to see National Theatre live for the first time. So there's a whole marketing aspect to that, and where those channels are. Anyway, loads of stuff. I'm absolutely delighted that we've been able to create this space, host this space for everybody today. We'd love to keep in touch and keep talking to you. We'll send a follow-up email to people so that you know how to do that. We have got a second online webinar coming up in a couple of weeks' time, where we'll be taking this conversation a bit further and hearing from some new speakers. I'm going to say that it is on 26th, Thursday the 26th of November. It's a little bit later, 12 till 1:30, so you can grab a sandwich and a cuppa, and hope that you will join us back then. Thank you very much, Sarah, Anna, Creative Scene team, for pulling this together. It's the first time we've done anything like this, so big learning for us in terms of, hopefully we've enabled some voices to come through. We've had some technical ability to make this happen. And thank you to all our brilliant speakers and contributors. Really rich source of content there for us to bring back to you. Anna, I think
sorry, just one thing while we don't forget that Matt has been busy beavering away in the background there. Hello, Matt, as our artist in residence for this webinar. So I suppose just before everyone leaves, I don't know whether you're able to share anything with us, Matt, and if we will be sharing a final version of this. But this is kind of Matt's response basically to how we've been, or what we've been saying, I suppose.
Well, like Nancy, I have been making copious notes.
We've got a gallery, Matt.
Sheets of paper. So this is how I work. So you can see words and little pictures and drawings and arrows, which will be hopefully make some sort of sense, a semblance of sense to people, and capture maybe not every part of the detail, but hopefully the flavour of the sort of like the lively presentations that we've had this afternoon, well, this morning. This morning. So, and I will endeavour to get these finished off, and then I'll share these with the group and everybody. So, brilliant. Yeah, I've got about 5 sheets of drawings.
Fabulous. That's really great. Thanks for your contribution, Matt. That's brilliant. Okay, so I suppose that's the end of today, and we just want to thank everyone, and we'll wrap up now and hope everyone has a really wonderful rest of Thursday. I was trying to remember what day it was there. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.